So good morning, everybody. It's such a privilege to be here in the room. It's been about 20 months since I've traveled anywhere around the world, and that's been very different because, as Sam said, I've been here a number of times before, and part of my job is really to go around and speak about what we do in Ireland, but also to advocate for strong food safety control systems right across the world, because I think we can all benefit from that. It's an absolute privilege, as I said, to be here, but it's equally a privilege to talk to you here online. And I see that we have about 63 participants, and I'm sure over the course of the next number of hours we'll have some more. But I was here yesterday and I heard some very, very interesting discussions about the importance of risk analysis and particularly risk assessment, and particularly focusing in on food consumption databases. I apologize to those of you who I have my back to in the room, but it's just a little bit challenging. But let's kick off. So as Sam said, I'm here today just to share with you some of the latest developments in the European food regulatory landscape. Okay. Let's go this way. So the agenda really for our discussion today is they're just going a little bit faster than I expected. So just to share with you a little bit about the policy environment, which really is setting the legislative agenda both at an international level, at a European level, and also equally at a national level. To share with you a little bit more detail about the changes in general food law in Europe, particularly on the transparency regulation, some words on the official control regulation in Europe, and indeed also then one of the more recent additions to the legal framework in Europe, which is around food safety culture, a critically important area for us to start thinking about. So to kick off the policy environment, I think it's fair to say that our global food system, and I'm sure you're very familiar with this visual, but it does describe at a very high level the complexity of the global food system that we're operating in. And that global food system was really challenged and tested over the last 20 months with COVID-19. And of course, critically important to nourish our populations is food, but it's even more important that that food is safe, and insofar as it can possibly be nutritious. And we had some discussions about that yesterday. It is within this complex global food system that we as regulators, you as industry, and indeed also consumers are engaged in, and of course consumers are even more engaged than they've ever been before. But at a very, very high level, at an international level, what's guiding us at the moment is the UN sustainability, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, of which there are 17, and many countries have signed up to those Sustainable Development Goals. And indeed, also within this international context is, and most recently, COP26 and a number of the commitments that were made there, but also indeed commitments that were made previously at various different other climate action events. And most recently, in the context of our direct area of interest, is around the Food System Summit, which was held in New York in September of this year. Here are just some quotes from some of the discussion that happened. Safe and nutritious food provides not only life and health, but also hope. And I think it's fair to say that during COVID-19, in fact, food did provide hope for many people. It was the thing that we all went to. It was the thing that nourished us. It was the thing that sustained us. And it was also, it brought families back together again, because people were obviously connecting more with their food as they were cooking food in their home. But a serious communication from COP26 is unlikely to achieve its aims without more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient food systems. So this is the international context within which we're operating at the moment. And of course, that has been very much the guiding light for the European Commission. And in 2019, they signed, the College of Commissioners in the European Commission signed the EU Green Deal. It's about improving the well-being of people, making Europe climate neutral, and protecting our natural habitat with good for people, planet, and the economy. And particularly, no one is going to be left behind. The EU has set a very ambitious goal for itself. It will become climate neutral by 2050, and in fact by 2030 it'll have reduced by 55% its greenhouse gases. It will protect human life, animals and plants by cutting pollution. It will help companies become world leaders in clean technologies and products, and will also ensure a just and inclusive transition. And this last one is particularly important for the European Commission. But coming from the European Green Deal is a significant number of different policies, strategies, initiatives, and all of these around this particular slide are connected to the food system. When you look at the transition to the circular economy, it's about the outputs of one particular supply chain feeding into another supply chain, and in fact, that those can be food supply chains. Sustainable transport will have an impact on farming. Achieving climate neutrality will have a significant impact on food production systems. Clean, reliable, and affordable energy is also something that's really important from a food production perspective, and balancing and trading off against what the land and our natural resources are being used for. And of course, aspiring to be a zero pollution Europe is critically important, as well as the fact that we're going to modernize and are in the process of modernizing the Common Agricultural Policy, which is a significant policy which supports farming and production of food within the European jurisdiction. But as I said earlier on, leaving no one behind is a critically important component of this. So this is not about the elite, it's not about big businesses, it's not about all of, I suppose, money necessarily moving things forward, but it's making sure that everybody in society is included in this transition to a better world into the future. I'm just going to focus in a little bit on one that's critically important from the context of food safety, and it is the Farmtoboard Strategy. And back in the early part of 2020, the European Commission published the Farmtoboard Strategy, which has four core aims at its heart. It's about sustainable food production, minimizing food loss and waste, ensuring sustainable food consumption, and sustainable food processing and distribution. And the food consumption is very much related to the conversation we had yesterday. But very importantly, it's about a fair, healthy, and environmentally friendly food system. It's incredibly ambitious to achieve such a thing. It is at the heart, as I said, of the European Green Deal, and it addresses comprehensively the challenges of sustainable food systems and recognizes inextricably the links between healthy people, healthy societies, and a healthy planet. It will enable, and I said, go back to this just transition to a sustainable European Union food system that safeguards food security and ensures access to healthy diets sourced from a healthy planet. This has very much been the guiding light for the Irish government, and we've just recently launched the Food Vision 2030, which sets an ambitious for Irish agri-food to be a world leader in sustainable food systems in 2030. So as you can see, the international is very much driving the agenda at a European level, and that is permeating down through into member states of the European. But I know that every country across the world is talking about this. Every country across the world is trying to grapple with, how do we do this? How do we make it fair? How do we make it healthy? And how do we make it environmentally friendly? Critically important is the food system for all of our survival. I just want to draw your attention a little bit to what do we mean by sustainability, because it means different things to different people. But the European Commission within the Farm-to-Fork strategy has captured it in essence within this visual. It is about economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social sustainability. And within the context of social sustainability, it talks about inclusiveness, just transition, but particularly important, public health and nutrition, and even more important to us here today and those of you online, food safety and food security. Food security was threatened within the COVID-19 pandemic, and it still is in many communities right across the world, and it's something that has really come to the forefront in our thinking since the pandemic began. Important in all of this is about the maintenance of high food safety standards, and that those are not compromised. And this is something I, as a regulator in Ireland, and indeed my colleagues across Europe and indeed across the world, have to make sure that there isn't a complacency that builds in on food safety, that it isn't just about sustainability, because in the end of the day, if it's not safe, it's not food. It doesn't matter whether it's produced sustainably or whether it is nutritious. If it's not safe, it's not food at the core. And I think this is something that we all need to make sure that we maintain that commitment and focus to the safety of our food. The overall goals of the Farm-to-Fork strategy are about reducing the environmental and climate footprint of the food system, leading a global transition towards competitive sustainability from farm to fork. So you can see that the European Commission expects and intends and will continue to build partnerships and collaborations across the world to drive this competitive sustainability transition at a global level. It's about tapping into new opportunities, new foods, new production systems, new types of foods, new types of systems, processes, and services, and ultimately creating a robust and resilient food system. It is going to have and intends to have a neutral or positive environmental impact on food production through preserving and restoring the land and sea-based resources, which are constantly under threat, mitigating climate change and adapting it to its impact, reversing the loss of biodiversity. In the context of ensuring food security and public health, it's about access for everyone to sufficient, nutritious, sustainable, and affordable food. We're making sure that we don't compromise on the standards of the safety and the quality with respect to plant health, animal health, and welfare, etc. So there is this commitment to maintain this high standard and continue to drive a high standard. And you'll see this principle permeating through some of the legislative instruments that are now emerging. Preserving also the affordability of food. And this is really about making sure that not alone are we producing safe food as a nutritious food, but that it is accessible to all. It's about promoting fair trade right across the world and making sure that we are able to maintain that global food system, because I think it's very clear that we've relied on that global food system very much so, particularly within COVID-19, but it is particularly vulnerable to the shocks, and we've seen how vulnerable it has been to the shock of COVID-19. And ensuring integrity, particularly of the single market within Europe, is a key critical principle. But importantly, and the Commission keep reiterating this, and we keep reiterating this as thought leaders within the food safety space, that food security and food safety are cornerstones of our food system and should never and will never be compromised. And this is critically important. In some ways that they're going to reach these goals, because these are really ambitious goals, incredibly challenging. And of course, when you think about the number of actors, even within the European Union food system, it is really complex, and it does require partnership, and it does require collaboration. It's about reducing risks, reducing the use and the risk and the dependency on pesticides. It's about revising animal welfare legislation, revising the feed additives regulation, establishing nutrient profiles for foods, stimulating reformulation of processed foods, so reducing salt, reducing fat, reducing sugar, revising, very importantly, the legislation on food contact materials to make sure that anything coming into contact with our food is safe. It's about putting a proposal for mandatory front of pack labeling. And I know this is something that I heard a little bit of conversation about yesterday. And indeed, there are many front of pack labeling systems right across the world. And of course, this creates confusion in some respects for consumers, because consumers should be able to read what information they get. It should be simple for them, and it should communicate to them the important aspects of that food within the context of nutrition. It's not about marketing. It is about making sure that they have the information they need to make the informed choice. There will be a proposal to require origin labeling for certain additional foods. So one of the things consumers are demanding every day is, where does my food come from? How is it produced? From what animal? From what farm? By what farmer? Or by what fisher? And it's important that people understand where their food comes from, because I think, again, and make sure that they then, I suppose, recognize the value that's in that food, because particularly important is that we also want to reduce food waste and we want to prevent food loss. And if you understand the value of how your food is produced and the costs associated with that, I think then we might just think about food in a different way. It's also about revising date marking rules, because there is confusion. Best before, used by. Consumers are confused, and it's up to us as regulators to make sure that it's clear to them as to what this information on the label means. So these are just some of the ways. But there are near enough, I think, about 20 legislative instruments proposed within the Farmtoboard Strategy, which will effectively drive the legislative agenda over the course of the next number of years, and indeed way beyond that at a European level. And that will have a significant impact on national legislative systems. And it's something that my organisation is looking very carefully at in terms of what do we have to do to make sure our control systems are fit for purpose for indeed reaching these very ambitious goals within the Farmtoboard Strategy. I'll call out one in particular because this may be of interest to you. It's around legislative framework for sustainable food systems. The objective is to accelerate and facilitate the transition to sustainable food systems and to ensure that all foods placed on the EU market become increasingly sustainable. It's based to ensure policy coherence at an EU and national level and to mainstream sustainability into food-related principles. So effectively, all of that legislative framework and the policy framework that's been setting the food safety agenda for many years, now we'll start to think about how do we build and mainstream sustainability into these policies, and how does that then, those policies get delivered through legislative initiatives and indeed also non-legislative instruments as well. It will set out a comprehensive set of general principles and requirements on the sustainability of food systems to strengthen the resilience of that system. And there will be a Commission proposal by 2023, but already the European Commission is carrying out impact assessments. It's listening to the voices of stakeholders to understand what the impact on businesses, on consumers will be with the advent of this legislative framework. And this is just one example. I mentioned already food contact materials, and also in addition, there's a significant amount of work going on front of pack labelling and all the nutrient profiles. So that gives you a sense of the policy environment at an international, a European, and a member state level at a European context. But I just wanted to just take a moment to just focus in on a couple of things that have changed fundamentally over the last number of years. And this one, general food law, is effectively the cornerstone of the European food safety system. It was agreed in 2002. It has gone through some minor iterations over the last number of years. But in 2014, the European Commission took it upon itself to have a deep look at the general food law and to understand whether or not it was delivering in its objectives around the principle of risk analysis and also the setting up of the European Food Safety Authority. And I know this is something that we mentioned a little bit more about yesterday. But in Europe, it is the cornerstone of our European food law system. And the REFIT program, effectively the evaluation of that general food law, looked at it from the relevance, its effectiveness, its efficiency, its coherence, and whether or not it was adding value. We're all in an environment where there's a significant legal framework within which we operate, but is it really adding any value? Are we getting what we expected out of it? The main findings of that is that it's still relevant, so it's still a good body of legislation. It has achieved in the main its core objectives. There were no real systematic failures, but it's really not adequate to address the new challenges of sustainability, climate change, biodiversity, etc. that we talked about at the international level just a moment ago. So this is what it said through its evaluation, that it needed to be improved, better traceability, so really traceability from farm to fork, right through from farmer to the table, looking at clear responsibilities for food business operators, making sure there was better transparency, because there was a sense, right or wrong, that in fact the information that was being used for risk assessments wasn't absolutely crystal clear, and everybody didn't have sight of that information. And therefore, what emerged through the risk analysis framework then was called into question. Information for consumers, also including nutrition. So these were some of the improvements, the main improvements that the European Commission identified through its evaluation of general food law since 2014. So since then, effectively, we've been just introducing an awful lot of those changes. And really, the main change that I wanted to talk to you about today is with respect to the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA. It is very much about more transparency, and we describe this as the transparency and sustainability regulation. It's about more transparency, better access to scientific studies for EFSA, but also for everybody to see those scientific studies. And if industry is carrying out a study, it has to register that study, and those data become then available for use for the risk assessment. More reliable, more independent studies. So again, greater access to relevant studies and evidence to make sure that the risk assessment is as robust as it possibly can be. It's based on the most up-to-date and the best science. Better governance as well. So EU member states are now going to have a greater contribution to the governance of the European Food Safety Authority, as well as to the scientific panels that are set up under EFSA. And critically important, and we always talk about effective risk communication, but every time I look back, we always talk about we could have done it better. This is really about setting a better, more structured, more robust framework for risk communication right across Europe and indeed beyond, because of course we're operating in a global food system and we need to be able to communicate within and outside of the European Union to make sure that we're collectively able to remove risk when it does get into the system. Improved coordination leading to better communication to public. So the EFSA has been working really hard over the last 3 or 4 years, and I sit on the EFSA advisory forum at the moment, and every meeting, and we have 4 a year, we get an update on the implementation of this transparency regulation within the EFSA framework. So you're going to start to see big differences in terms of how EFSA engages, the data that's available, how the risk is communicated. So make sure you watch out and are connected regularly to what's going on at EFSA, because they are also working globally to make sure that there is coherence in the risk assessment. I just want to focus in a little bit now on the official control regulation. So in 2017, following a number of years of discussion at European level, the European Commission, the European Union decided to adopt its official control regulation. And now we have what we describe affectionately as OCR 625 within my organization. And we've been preparing and are still implementing this legislation at a national level, but indeed also our colleagues across the member states. But it is fundamentally risk-based, and it always has been, but it's improved and strengthened the risk basis of the official control system. It's broader scope, so it now includes plants, animals, etc. It also calls for more transparency, so publishing information with respect to official control systems in member states and at a European level. It's about the alignment of various different types of controls and trying to simplify them, but for food business operators, making sure that it's very clear what they're required to do, both to import food and to export food, and indeed also increasing efficiency. Because I'm sure, like in Ireland and indeed at European level, there is a limit to the resources that we have available in order for us to be able to do our job. And we need to make sure that we're using our resources in the areas of highest risk and to the best effect. It calls out, and I won't go into detail on any of these, but a number of specific areas within the official control regulation about border control posts and what happens there, about import documentation and simplifying and streamlining what documentation is required, and the systems through which you input that information so that that information is accessible to many different entities across the European Union. It is strengthening the systems on food fraud, and this is an area within Ireland that we've been working very hard on over the last number of years to try and understand what kind of a control system you need to put in place in order to be able to detect food fraud and then also manage for it and control for it, so that you don't find yourself always reacting to issues of food fraud, but that you're proactively going after and identifying issues. It's about integrating data systems. So we have many data systems, as I'm sure you do here. It's about bringing them all together so that we can make the best possible use of the data that we're collecting and that we're generating from that data and those integrated systems insight that's going to be able to help us do our jobs better. Talking also about EU reference laboratories and strengthening the reference laboratory network at a European level, and it's about putting in place 2 new reference centres, one on animal welfare and one on food authenticity and integrity, and these are going to be led, the second one is going to be led by the Joint Research Centre. Again, critically important, because in order for us to be able to understand whether a product is what it says it is, we need to analyse it. And analysing it is quite difficult because new methodologies are required, new analytical techniques, etc. And I think also something that we have seen a huge increase over the last 20 months, in fact, is the rise in e-commerce. So food being traded online. So much food now is being traded through social media platforms. And this is becoming something that regulatory authorities are going to need to understand. Businesses are innovating. They are producing food, they're distributing through channels that we don't fully understand. And indeed, that is something that we really have to work hard on trying to understand how we can do that. I want to finally finish on another piece of legislation that has really just come into play in March of 2021. And it is adapting the food hygiene regulations at a European level, which basically set out the framework for, how do you produce hygienic and safe food. But it's a particularly important area which is just really emerging over the last couple of years. It's around building a better culture of food safety into your businesses. And indeed, on Thursday of this week, the Food Safety Consultative Council of the Food Safety Authority of Ireland held an open meeting with businesses. We had about 800 businesses come in online. There's a recording of that I can send around to all participants that you can then view on our media channels. But this is a really interesting move, I think, from the European Commission, and indeed, of course, it's very much linked to that drive at a US level as well, which is talking about building a better culture of food safety. But what is it? Because culture is something we all know that drives the success of businesses, of organizations, but in the context of food safety, what is it? It's the attitudes, the beliefs, the values that are shared by all people within a food company, from the leadership at the top to those driving the trucks and distributing the products. How many times have we seen and heard food business owners talking about how important food safety is, but the person driving the truck doesn't understand it, they just don't get it, or indeed the reverse. The person in the truck gets it, but the leadership doesn't understand it or isn't driving it. But consumers should always be able to trust that businesses produce food that is safe, it's trustworthy, and they expect that there's a strong food safety culture. They don't forgive businesses who don't have safe food and who don't put safe food on the market. It's not about only doing the right thing when the food inspector is on site, it's about doing the right thing all of the time. In essence, it's about how we make safe food around here. And this needs to be the mantra of every employee in every food business that's putting a product on the market in whatever way it's putting it on the market, either selling it in a restaurant, at a retail, or business to business. Because of course we know that global food system is very much based on trust, but it's also based on standards, it's based on commitment, and it's based on a demonstration that in fact we are doing the right thing around here and we are making sure that the food that we're producing is safe. I just wanted to share this final slide with you. On Thursday, this gentleman, Brian Highland, who's the Group Director for Food Safety, Quality and Animal Welfare in a very large meat processing facility or business in Ireland, which also has businesses in the UK. He talks about the challenges faced by the food industry have never been greater, and I think everybody would attest to that. Our customers and consumers of our products are expecting the highest possible levels of transparency as to the origins of their food. They are expecting that their food, that the products to be completely safe for them and their families to consume, and they're expecting that all aspects of our processes in Dawn Meats are to the highest possible standards at all stages, and that they can trust us as a business. Now, this is a business that has been growing and growing and growing. It is a substantial contributor to the Irish agri-food sector, both from an imports and an exports point of view. But this is their journey on the left-hand side, and I thought it was just useful because sometimes you think about, how do I do this? How do we do this in a business? But equally, how does a regulator look at this in a business? And I think that's going to be the challenge. How do we as regulators verify that there is a food safety culture in a business? So it is about the business setting out its own food safety culture, about describing it from the top to the bottom. It's about commitment from the top, but right throughout the organization, consistent ongoing communication, delivering on your objectives and measuring your targets. It's engagement with your staff, talking to them about what matters. And if they have a problem, them feeling empowered to speak up about that issue. And I will say this in just a moment on this one. In the FSAI, we have found ourselves, we have whistleblowing legislation in Ireland, and indeed that has served us as an organisation very well, in that employees or ex-employees of food companies can blow the whistle literally on bad practices in their business, in the business. So over the last number of years, we've identified that there is, issues within certain companies. We've gone into those companies and investigated. And in fact, deliberately, those companies have set in place systems that have effectively led to almost a veneer of a good food safety culture on the outside, but when you start to dig deep, that's not the reality. I think that legislation is also starting to emerge as a mechanism by which industry, employees within industry can tell the regulator when things are going wrong, because as we all know, regulators aren't in every food business every day. But it's also about recognizing staff for doing the right thing. So not just turning the other way or closing your eyes when you see something going wrong. It's about identifying there's something wrong, speaking up and being recognized for doing that, because that is really where you come back to the attitudes and the beliefs and the values. It's also about recognizing that there are challenges. Like every day a business and every day every organization, is exposed to certain challenges, but it is about innovating around those challenges, coming up with new ways of dealing with problems. And of course, digital transformation, which we're going to hear about over the course of this workshop, is driving an awful lot of what's moving at a European level, at a national level, in businesses and in other organizations, but also it's a journey. It never stops. Anybody in any organization who thinks you've got culture done is wrong, because culture never stops. That journey is continuous and you have to continuously improve. And that is the basis really of having a strong food safety culture in your business, that it is about looking for opportunities to improve and continuously doing so. Just some takeaways. The policy environment is changing internationally and it is setting the legislative agenda regionally and nationally. Consumers are demanding transparency in risk assessment and in decision making. Official control systems are now end-to-end and risk-based, requiring data and evidence to inform and drive decision making. And food safety culture, regulatory compliance is just not enough anymore. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. And thanks very much.